Everybody, I'm Kate Seeley, Vice President here at MEI. Thank you all so much for joining us. It gives me great pleasure to welcome today Mark Katz for a talk entitled America's War on Terror After Iraq and Afghanistan. And the talk comes out of a policy series that Mark has been working on over at the Middle East Policy Council, researching and writing for the past 6 months while he's been on sabbatical, called The War on Terror in Perspective, History, Geopolitics, and American Foreign Policy. Please go check it out at the Middle East Policy Council website or at his website, marknkatz.com. He's written about 18 policy briefs so far, which include an assessment of our democratization efforts in Iraq and Afghanistan, as well as the implications of our withdrawal from Iraq and our impending withdrawal from Afghanistan on our policy in the region. His last 4 have been looking at our war on terror in Pakistan, Yemen, and Iran, and the implications of this war on terror on these various countries. They're extremely succinct, well-researched, and a very constructive addition to the policy debate over the ramifications of our presence in the region. As Mark notes in one of his pieces, forecasting is a hazardous business. We don't really know what's going to happen in the future, but it is important to look ahead and consider the options and possibilities, and better an analytical and thoughtful academic than an ideologue. And as I've dipped into these series, I found that they raise some very important questions about what we need to be thinking about in the long term as we pull out of these countries. A vacuum is created, and the question of who is going to fill that vacuum and what they're going to do arises. As you know, our troops are out of Iraq, although we have remaining support troops, which I gather will be out by the middle of 2011. And also in mid-2011, Obama has said he will begin the drawdown of troops from Afghanistan. So we're looking ahead, and Mark will be posing some very important questions relating to these two countries and our role there today. He's a professor of government and politics at George Mason University, where he's been teaching since 1988. During that time, he's focused heavily on the Middle East and Russia. Is quite the expert on that area and has written many books on the region, including The Third World and Soviet Military Thought, Russia and Arabia, Soviet Foreign Policy Toward the Arabian Peninsula, and Revolutions and Revolutionary Waves. Thank you very much for joining us today, Mark. Quickly before we begin, though, just some housekeeping notes. Next Tuesday, we have another talk with Andrew Exum, who's a fellow at the Center for New American Security, CNAS. He's also known as Abu Muqawama, the father of the resistance, on his blog site, which is an excellent blog. He is going to be talking about Afghanistan, looking ahead to the next fighting season. So please come see that next week. And also, if you come to a lot of our events, consider becoming a member. For $100, you can join up. We've got membership forms downstairs. And it entitles you to a subscription to the Middle East Journal, which is one of the few peer-reviewed academic journals on the Middle East. We also do a lot of programs here. We have an amazing internship program. Every semester, 25 students come and learn about the Middle East here. We teach languages, Arabic, Hebrew, Farsi, and Turkish. We have an amazing library, and your support will help us to sustain all of this. So please do join now. And I apologize for haranguing you, but I'm modeling after NPR, which is very good at raising money by haranguing people. Now, please join me in welcoming Mark Katz. And I should mention, any of you in the back room, if you'd like to come to the front, we've got about 6 seats open here in the front.
Great. Well, thanks, Kate, very much for that very nice introduction. Very grateful to Kate Seeley, the Vice President of the Middle East Institute, for hosting this event. And I'd also like to thank the Middle East Policy Council for putting up with me since September, and especially their Vice President, Ann Joyce, who's here as well, who's been just a tremendous pleasure to work with. And these are two really wonderful institutions, and I dearly love them both, and so it's been great to have some association with the two of them. As Kate indicated, this project I've been working on, The War on Terror in Perspective, History, Geopolitics in American Foreign Policy. What has sort of inspired it, if you will, was because in the old days, I used to specialize on Soviet Third World relations. And I was one of those who, back in the old days, just looking through Soviet military literature, could tell that things were not going well for them. And that part of the problem was that their clients, their allies, weren't all that, well, reliable, and that they were constantly arguing and causing trouble for one another. And to have said this, way back in 1982, it wasn't a real popular thing to have said. In other words, that the common wisdom was that, the Soviets and their allies are, unified, and they're pursuing a monolithic expansionist venture, and that's what basically got headlines and got attention. Now, of course, what happened is that by the end of that decade, communism fell, and the Soviet Union collapsed, and what I had been saying, was correct, but by then, who cared? It was no longer terribly interesting. I had a piece, some of you may be old enough to remember, in the Washington Post in 1991, an article, Gorbachev Ruined My Career. And my only consolation was that he ruined his own as well. But during the 1990s, when no one was interested in Russia, since Russia under Yeltsin was not very interesting to most people, what began to interest me was the growing phenomenon of radical Islamist movements, and did they have any kind of similarities to Marxist movements in the sense that did they somehow manage to overcome the problems that the Marxists had in terms of just the kind of person that sort of was attracted to this ideology, just didn't seem to be able to cooperate very well with his fellow man? Were the Islamic radicals any different? And it came to my belief was that even in the 1990s that we saw evidence that that they were not different, that they were not cooperative either. Then, of course, came 9/11, and we had the war on terror, a term which I really dislike, that Al-Qaeda, its affiliates, yes, these people are terrorists, but they're far more than terrorists. They are revolutionaries, like the Marxists were, and they need to be understood as revolutionaries. And one of the things about revolutionaries is that those who are even reasonably successful is that they have an idea that is attractive to others. It might not be attractive to us. That doesn't matter. What matters is understanding its attraction to others. And this is something that I don't think has been paid sufficient attention, although I think more attention is being paid to this. In any event, to get down to the subject of today's presentation, we are in the process of withdrawing from Iraq. We appear to be on track to withdraw from Afghanistan. What's going to happen? And I think there's all kinds of dire predictions as to what is going to happen. And I can't help remembering again, way back in 1973, we withdrew from Indochina. There were predictions that terrible things would happen, and terrible things did happen. Marxism spread to an awful lot of countries in the developing world in the 1970s. None of them prospered as a result, that's for sure. But by 1989, communism was collapsing.